Oh, that's what I wanted my phone for.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Are we ready to get started? And have some great conversation? Okay, I see a thumbs up right there. In the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is David Ortiz. I'm a senior diversity and inclusion consultant at Oracle, and I'll be the moderator for today's panel. We are going to discuss pathways to leadership. So we have a diverse group of individuals here in the tech industry, leaders who are going to share information about themselves and also share some tips and facts and stories to enlighten and illuminate the individuals in this room. We talk about the lack of diversity in technology, but it's more than just getting individuals in the door. It's helping them grow and thrive in their careers as well. So we're hopeful that the dialogue we have today with these individuals on stage will share some insight with you. But let's start with some introductions. We'll start all the way at the far end. Mike, just a brief introduction, your role, your organization, and if you don't mind, a fun fact about yourself. So a fun fact about me is I have a moderate fear of clowns, so I find them a bit creepy. So that's my fun fact I'll share with the group today. But Mike, let's start with you.
Yeah, hi. It's great to be here. My name is Mike McDonald. I lead recruiting at Pandora, which is in Oakland. Can you hear me now? Okay, I'll start over. So I'm Mike McDonald. I lead recruiting at Pandora, which is located in Oakland. I've been there for about 5 years. When I started, Pandora had about 300 employees. Now we're just over 2,000, so about 2,200. Fun fact, when I was a kid, I used to love to sing and dance. I did some jazz dancing, spirit hands, and had a chance to be a player in Oliver Twist, Syracuse, New York. So I tell my kids I was off-Broadway, about 5 hours off-Broadway.
Okay. Thanks for sharing, Mike.
Awesome.
Kinjil?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kinjil Mathur. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Foursquare. Been there a little over 2 years. Fun fact about me, I discovered 3 years ago that I am pretty good at sharpshooting. So have started doing that and picking that skill up.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. And you can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Kinda. Can you hear me now? So I'm going to do this very awkwardly for the duration of this panel. I'm Cody Foster. I'm the Senior Vice President of Data Strategy at Viacom, which is a really fancy way of saying I run a product development department. I've been at Viacom for a little over a year. And a fun fact about myself, I don't know if it's a fun fact, but it's something that people are constantly surprised at when I tell them where I'm from. I'm actually from New York. And you know, in New York now, when you meet people, almost no one is actually from there. So I actually was born and raised in New York, and happy to be here today.
Okay, thank you, Cody. Sarah?
My name is Sarah Clatterbuck. I am a director of engineering at LinkedIn. I lead a team of engineers in our application infrastructure group. And a fun fact about me, or as we say at LinkedIn, something not on my LinkedIn profile, is I've had the privilege of racing my bike against 3 Olympians here in the Bay Area.
Wow, so they did not disclose any of this information during the panel preparation session, so I was pleased to find out these fun facts with our panelists here today. So we're here to talk about pathways to leadership, and the interesting thing is, when you ask somebody what is leadership, they each have their own definition. So my first question to kind of level set this conversation is, how do you define leadership? And we'll start with anybody who wants to answer first.
Okay, I'll jump in.
Okay.
I think for me, leadership is pretty straightforward from the standpoint of it's really about empowering and motivating, people. And they're not necessarily people that are reporting to you. You don't, need to be someone's boss to be a leader. I think anyone in an organization can be a leader. And if you can sort of serve first and be the first one to give or to help, then I think that's the first step and the primary priority. of a leader, of a good leader.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd echo some of those points. I would say that it is a position of service, first and foremost, to your team and to the company. It's a position of influence. And for me, it's really about bringing people together from different perspectives to solve problems and empowering them to solve problems, empowering them to navigate conflict and to be great as a team.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of core competencies that make leaders who they are and good leaders. But I think what separates, in my mind, like the good from the great are leaders that really recognize that they do come from a place of influence and have influence, and they decide very proactively that they are going to be change agents. And they recognize when there's a problem in whether it's the culture, the strategy, the team, whatever it may be, and they advocate for their team, they advocate for the change, and they use their influence to really impact the org. And I think that's what really separates good to great for me.
Thank you. And Mike?
I think service to others is a very important part of leadership because there's only so much that one person can do. So there is an element of really connecting with people and in trying to help them do their best. I think there's another element, which is sort of maybe the classical definition of leadership is someone who has an opinion or an idea, a vision to solve a problem, and has a passion around doing something about it. And so if you take that, seeing something that maybe could happen a different way, and then the ability to mobilize a bunch of people in order to help solve that problem. And then I think if you add the sort of maybe more popular or more sort of emerging understanding that we're really in service to others, then that's kind of what I think about as a well-rounded leader.
No, this is great stuff. So we heard some common themes here. We heard service, influence, and action. And we need to take a point to differentiate between diversity and inclusion. And one of the consultants I've worked with in the past at Korn Ferry mentioned that diversity is the mix, inclusion is making the mix work, which leads me to the concept of inclusive leadership, because we realize individuals don't necessarily leave companies, they leave managers and leaders. So the concept of inclusive leadership is something that I've been reading about, and you've probably read some information in some of the trade journals, particularly in diversity and inclusion. But these are leaders who are always asking, who is not here that needs to be here? Whose perspective do I need? And they're culturally competent as well. And they mentor and influence others who are not like them in some way. So my next question for the group is, what role has mentoring or sponsorship played in your advancement in your career? Now mentoring, I've heard it explained, is the conversations they have about you when you're in the room, your one-on-ones. Sponsorship is the conversations they have about you when you're not in the room. So when individuals are identifying talent for succession planning, for example, is there a sponsor you have at the table throwing your name in the hat? So who would like to take that question? So again, what role has mentoring and or sponsorship helped in advancing in your career?
Yeah, I'll maybe jump on that. So I think I've been a little late to the game in my career about appreciating and leveraging other people for my own development. And I think one of the takeaways, there were people that were early in their career here that I would want to impart is the importance of, even while you're trying to demonstrate your capability, having the humility to not be afraid to basically share what you don't know. And I think that's the role that a mentor can play, is someone that can trust you, someone that you trust who's looking out for your best interest, that you can open up to and say, I'm motivated to be really good, but there are areas that I don't know. And so I think that's something that a mentor can do. And then, as you said, a sponsor is someone who understands what it is that you're up to in the world and can help find opportunities for you to apply yourself in that way.
Okay, good information.
So I'd actually think about these two things in complementary ways. I think of mentorship as sort of a basic requirement for success. Everyone should have a mentor, whether that's their boss or a friend or someone in the industry that they can ask questions of, and who can ask them great questions during important decision points in their career. And I've definitely had that, somebody that I've known since the first company I worked in tech, and she's been that person that I can ask questions of and who asks great questions of me. But I actually think a sponsor is more key to your career advancement, and that's what I've felt personally. I had a sponsor at LinkedIn for a couple of years who was a vice president a couple of levels above me in the management chain, and he really advocated for my growth, and it was the things that he said about me when I wasn't in the room to his peers that I think really paved the way for my advancement. And so I actually think that's really the level up in terms of empowering career growth, is having a sponsor within your organization.
Okay. Very powerful.
Yeah,
Thank you, Sarah.
I mean, I agree. I think, mentors and sponsors are wildly important, but there is a problem because there really aren't enough for, to be frank, non-white tech, workers. There's a massive gap in. I've been, plenty of companies and, large corporations and startups where I'm like, who am I going to talk to here that has any concept or any context of what I'm going through from, a cultural, professional sort of, dynamic. And, I think, I would love to see more effort put, sort of established around setting up, outside, in company programs for mentorship, but also I think there's going to have to be outside of the company programs for mentorship where someone can maybe, contact me who doesn't work at Viacom and say, hey, I don't even work at your company, but I need a mentor. Can you be my mentor? Because otherwise, I think there's going to continue to be this really wide management and leadership deficiency where we all get the jobs because I think initially we're really technically proficient, and so we keep working our way up into the room because we need the tech guy to explain to us how this works, and then it's like, all right, you're ready to graduate into a management position, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, I'm not writing code anymore, but I don't know how to manage or lead because no one ever took the time to walk me through that. Yeah. And I think that's really where you start seeing people running into a brick wall, especially, if you're a diverse tech worker, because you didn't have the exposure to boardroom level people up into the point where all of a sudden you're supposed to know how to interact with them.
Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Cody. I think in my career, I wouldn't be where I'm at without mentors. And I think it's like any other relationship. You're not going to always find them in the company. You have to proactively look outside. They should be different experience levels. You should have male and female mentors. You should have people that are in industry, outside of industry, constantly giving you feedback and perspective and broadening your horizons about different types of career paths that are out there that you may not know of. It's a hard journey, and we all have insecurities, and that mentor-mentee relationship can be a really profound one and can impact you. So, I've had people come up to me after meeting at a round table or at an event that's like, hey, let's set up coffee, and then they become my mentorees, or I've reached out to people proactively that really inspire me and said, hey, I'd really love to get to know you a little bit better and work at that relationship. You have to date them. You have to, make sure that you're keeping in touch with them, that they're invested in your career. But it is, for me personally, it was kind of a make or break point at certain points in my career, depending on the advice that I needed.
And that's great insight that you shared, that balance between internal and external. That's a very valid point.
One of the things I was going to add is oftentimes it's sort of put on the individual to go and find a mentor, and it takes a lot of chutzpah to go to someone who you think you can learn from. It takes a lot of confidence, and confidence isn't necessarily something you're born with. It's something that you develop over time. So I think if there aren't leaders that are out there that look like you or come from your background, it might be hard. So I think it's incumbent on people that are leaders, that are in service to others, to really extend yourself to individuals to help bring them up so that they can then develop a sense of confidence. I think if we have a lack of a pipeline of leaders, if that's an issue that we think that it's out there, part of it is just, at what point are you developing the confidence to put yourself into those positions? So something that's important.
Good point, Mike. And I've experienced both formal mentoring programs. You usually would have a formal mentoring program administered by the HR department in your organization, but there's also informal mentoring as well. So if you're an individual who's looking to grow in your career, if there's somebody you look up to, maybe somebody on this panel, feel free to reach out to them and go with the purpose when you ask for mentoring. The worst that they could say is no, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. But we see here that sponsorship and mentoring are both very some crucial pieces to advancing in your career. And the mentoring, you have to be open to the mentoring also. You will get a lot of advice, but it's what you do with the advice that has the impact on your own career, which you take ownership of. So it's that having that confidence to go out and seek individuals, doing that self-assessment, acknowledging what skill sets you need to develop. I have another question here, and this is where we get to some of the meat of our conversation. As you were on your path to leadership, what obstacles or barriers have you experienced and how did you overcome them? Perhaps you leveraged some of your mentors and they gave you some advice, but again, what obstacles or barriers have you experienced? And I'll share an example in my case. I was in the healthcare industry for about 18 years total, worked in the last 12 years in diversity and inclusion, but in about 2001, I transitioned from New Jersey to Chattanooga, Tennessee, of all places. And the culture change was an obstacle. It took me a while to get adjusted. So I had to have conversations with individuals, get connected with the Latino advocacy organization to find people like me and to deal with issues that I was experiencing. So from your perspectives and based on your stories, what obstacles or barriers have you experienced and how did you overcome them?
I mean, at a broad level, racist, to be honest with you. I think at the end of the day, there is this really deep-rooted, endemic sort of passive racism where, especially, being black and being in tech, it's always this issue of, being twice as good to get, half the credit. Yeah. And I think that's something where, sort of having that obstacle of knowing that you're going to have to sort of quote unquote eat it from time to time, to take a step back so hopefully you can get 2 steps forward is something that I think early on in my career I struggled with. Sort of the political jujitsu that you have to use within a corporate environment to be heard and to lean in and to be taken seriously. I've been in rooms where, in meetings where someone turned and asked me to go get the coffee. And I was like, I'm giving the presentation because I built the thing that we're talking about. Yeah. So I think, that's something that obviously exists. And I think, the more we can sort of be frank and talk about that openly, and then also empower each other to stand up for our colleagues and to stand up for, our work friends, I think is important too. I think, I mean, raise your hand if you've been in a meeting and some, senior executive was just wildly mansplaining something to a woman in the room. That happened to me last Tuesday. And, you kind of have to, like, after the meeting, throw side-eye at that person and be like, yo, that wasn't cool, And I think that's important. And I think that's, a really sort of hard thing to do because, we all have a certain amount of political capital, quote unquote, within an organization, and expending that for other people or choosing the wrong battle is scary sometimes. Yeah.
And how do you develop that confidence? And anybody else, feel free to chime in because there is that skill set. You may not be comfortable, and it takes a tremendous amount of courage to speak up and speak out, particularly for those who are not in the room. But part of the diversity and inclusion work in organizations is speaking out in calling out individuals when they make an offhand remark and using that as a teachable moment. And I'm glad that you brought up the issue of racism, because we do realize racism exists, and there is unconscious bias and overt bias. And so how do you balance the political awareness, that being aware, and then calling individuals out on things? Anybody?
I think the overt problem is a little easier to take on head on, because everyone knows when it's happened and it's very clear, and then there can be, sort of a tactical organizational approach to that. I think the more subtle forms of bias that happen are more challenging, and that's where we really have to all look out for each other, and we need allies in the organization who will look out for us in those circumstances.
Okay.
I think it's fascinating that the tech industry is dealing with this situation, because honestly, a lot of people that work in tech consider themselves to be pretty progressive. Tech is a meritocracy. That's kind of the sense. But at the same time, this is a palatable discussion that's going on, and I think people are being and I know that I am too. I was adopted by two white parents. My dad was a professor at Syracuse University. Where I grew up in upstate New York, you had basically everyone who was black lived in the lower income part of Syracuse, and it's where most of the crime was. So I grew up with progressive parents who adopted me, and still I grew up with that. That was kind of like the water that I swam in, right? So now I lead recruiting at a tech company, and it's all about how can we find these workers fast enough to get on board, to build a product, to ship it so we can survive. And everyone thinks that they're progressive, but now we're being faced with biases that well-meaning people have, and I think that it's a really, really good conversation that's happening right now. I don't think the solution is going to happen very quickly. I think it's going to take time, but it starts with awareness.
Yeah, and the conversation we were having in the green room, everybody wants a quick fix to the problem, but think about how long it took us to get here. So it's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take dialogue, such as we're having today, and being authentic in that dialogue, which requires some sense of trust. But if you don't have that trust, you won't have that ensuing conversation. So, anybody else have anything they want to add?
No, I think Mike made a good point from the standpoint of most people are well-meaning, and I think that's where we sort of struggle. It's very easy when you have a villain in front of you to attack the villain, but when it's sort of like this, ethereal, layer that you're sort of wading through, and you don't really know who to attack or how to attack them, I think it creates a sense of not hopelessness, but just what do I do? Like, how do I bring to someone's attention within the organization, whether it's HR or someone in the diversity inclusion sort of department, that I feel like there's a bias that's happening against me? And I think because it's very difficult to prove, a lot of folks just sort of sit on their hands because they don't know where to go and what to do about it. And I don't necessarily have an answer to how to fix that, but I think that's the discussion that needs to happen. I think almost every senior executive needs to realize that I am probably wildly biased. I took an implicit association test recently myself. I realized I'm a horrible person. I mean, if it's on, you can go on the Harvard implicit association website, find out, I had to reflect on life choices. What am I, who am I? I think, more self-awareness is the beginning of that, where a lot of these well-meaning people, they sit around and say, hey, I'm well-meaning, so I can't be biased. And I'm like, probably that's wrong. And I think that's something that, we should just, the first step is just accepting it and saying, hey, look around the room, we need to, tackle this head on and be truthful with ourselves.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that information on the implicit association test. And you could search for it online and able to take it online. You don't necessarily have to share your results on a panel here, but thank you, Cody, for sharing.
I'm burying my results.
But that self-awareness, people think about diversity and inclusion, and they have a tendency to think it's learning more about others. But the first component is really learning about yourself. It's what biases, unconscious, for example, do you have? What's your biography? We each shared our stories up here. That has an impact on you. Both my parents were blue-collar workers, and I enter a corporate environment. That did something to me based on my background. So the concept of managing my own career and mentoring was a foreign concept, and you don't know what you don't know coming into organizations, and that's what the roles of mentors make so important. But thank you for sharing that information, Kodi. Anything else we want to add before we get into the next question?
Yeah, I would say that the fact that conferences like this are happening, and art and media and news, like everything is focused and trying to help bring awareness to a lot of the challenges and the biases that we have. Like, that didn't exist for a very long time. And when I think about my career, like now, after tons of conversations, I can look back and be like, holy shit, like that was wrong what that person said to me. That was shitty feedback that went in an HR file that called me aggressive, which I know my counterparts weren't getting. Like, things are starting to click now, and like give yourselves a pat for even being here, because I think that's like phase one. Like, you talk about biases and you talk about like that person saying something that doesn't feel right to me, like recognizing that, you don't naturally recognize it sometimes. And so what I have found really helpful is like, I've sought out people that I think are so much more well-versed on this topic than I am, and spending time when they're like, hey, that's actually a gender bias way of leading a meeting or having a conversation. And I'm like, wow, thank you for pointing that out, because I can't tell you how many times that's happened. And so now that I understand what some of the biases are, I can actually take action. And so, don't feel bad if you don't really know kind of what those behaviors are, like they're not really apparent to you. Have conversations, start to recognize them. That's the way we're going to create change, because a lot of things go unnoticed. And I think that that's like step one. Even all the conversation that we're having around this topic, there's still so much of these kind of recognized biases that we all have that we need to like raise the awareness about individually.
And I'm happy, Kinjil, that you mentioned the information in the HR file, because I find that performance reviews and evaluations are a two-way conversation, and what happens shouldn't be a surprise, but you may have some situations where people tend to be a bit passive-aggressive and they bring everything up. But as an employee, you could challenge some of those comments also. So you don't necessarily have to agree with that feedback, but it opens the door to dialogue. And I've had that happen to me also. So you have to just engage in that dialogue and get to the root cause. And because it's perception, the individual rating, you may see it one way, but you come from it at a different perspective. So thank you. I have a question here about micro-iniquities. And micro-iniquities are ways in which individuals are singled out, overlooked, ignored, or otherwise discounted based on a characteristic that they can't change about themselves. So gender, race, height, for example. Have you ever experienced any micro-iniquities, and how did you deal with that? And the example I share is, I was born in New Jersey. My parents are Puerto Rican, and I moved to Chattanooga. So when I talk to individuals, they say, whoa, I was expecting an accent. So how do I process that as a Latino from New Jersey? Were you expecting a thick Spanish accent, or were you expecting that New Jersey accent? So I just said, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I grew up in New Jersey, moved to Milwaukee, was an English major, and here I am. So kind of diffuse the situation there. And it took me a long time to get to the point where I was confident enough to answer it in a semi-smart alecky way. But have you experienced anything similar during the course of your careers on your path to leadership, and how did you address it?
I think. I'm like, where do I begin?
Let's start with one.
Yeah. So one of the classic ones that I've sort of dealt with is people being sort of surprised. It's like, wow, you're so smart. And it's like, why are you surprised I'm smart? So it's kind of like, wow, that's a compliment, but it's like a totally backhanded compliment. So that's one. Oh, and the whole you know, you have a really well-spoken like white voice.
You're so articulate.
Yeah, so, you know, because, you know, when you're black, you have to bring your white voice into the office, you know, every day.
Yeah.
I had to explain that to a group of senior executives recently that were doing a recruiting, you know, initiative. And so these are the sorts of things that we think about, you know, like, people, you know, they'll comment on my name, Kodi. And then they're like, oh, I didn't expect you to, you know, you don't look like a Kodi. And I'm like, what does a Kodi look like? And I think that's another thing too. You know, black families think about what to name their kids because they need to get over the HR biases in the application process to get jobs. Because if my name was more black sounding, it would probably be 50% harder for me to get an interview. So, I mean, these are the sorts of like micro inequities that I think a lot of times are really, they're unspoken, but if you're living them, it's sort of like the everyday sort of acknowledgement. And a lot of the times, depending on which side of the bed I rolled out on, I'll throw shade at someone for making a comment, being like, man, that was like really good work. Like, you're really smart. Or sometimes I'll let it go. And I think that's, you know, just depends on sort of where I am in the moment as far as being, you know, fed up with it or not.
I have much more trivial examples, but it happens like all the time. Like being in a board meeting and everybody's making small talk and it's all white males and they all ask each other about the game last night, but nobody asked me about the game last night, as if I don't watch basketball or don't know what football is or anything like that. I think bonding between male executives happens over a glass of whiskey, and they feel comfortable asking their male counterparts to go out for a drink after work and take their one-on-one at a local bar, but they don't feel comfortable asking me that. And so I feel like I'm missing out on a bonding experience. Things like that happen all the time. I haven't quite figured out exactly how to address it, other than going back to my aggressive self and just inserting, my 2 cents in the conversation to just talk about the game and, overcompensate for their micro inequalities that they're throwing at me. But I haven't figured out a more effective way, other than like me making up for it, how to address them.
Okay. And if you had an inclusive leader, they would notice that you weren't being included in the conversation and ask a question that would draw you in. And that's why inclusive leadership is so important today, because we want those cultures where people feel inclined to share their perspective, because it really is about engagement and individuals sharing their thought process, because we don't see things the same way. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I think the most common thing that I see in my own situation is being the only woman in a room and then being either talked over or saying something that then someone else says 10 minutes later and everyone kind of gloms onto it. I have a specific story, though. I mean, I think this is kind of a happy and sad story because my opinion was actually solicited in one of these meetings by our head of engineering, because we were kind of wandering into my area of expertise. And so I felt like that was an act of inclusion on his part to ask my opinion. And then as I started to give my opinion, I said, well, I have 2 thoughts on this, and I got through the first one, and then someone started talking over me. And our head of engineering interrupted him and said, hey, I don't think Sarah was done talking. I think she had one more point. So again, it was like an act of inclusion. I felt the micro inequity that happened, and then another act of inclusion to make sure that my voice was heard. So, I think people are being very intentional about this. And then I think I also have a story of when I saw this happening to someone else and attempted to be inclusive on their behalf. There was a young woman coming through an interview process, and I had been following her progress. And when I was reading the feedback for one of the interviews, I saw that she actually got the technical question correct. And the interviewer said, well, but she wasn't all that confident in her answer, and she took a long time checking it after she wrote it on the whiteboard, so I don't think we should hire her. And so I actually read that and thought, well, this was actually a biased interview, and basically went and spoke with the interviewer directly about it, and then advocated with our recruiting team for her to have another interview.
Wow. And that's what it takes. It's challenging some decisions, and seeking out those different perspectives and calling out things as well as you see them. And I'm inclined to say in a respectful manner, because you don't want individuals to shut down. But we also need to be aware that privilege exists also, and having conversations around privilege, male privilege, white privilege, heterosexual privilege, ability privilege, but the climate has to be right to have those conversations, and if it's not right, individuals tend to shut down. So that's why you see a lot of focus on unconscious bias, just raising that awareness to have that dialogue. This is a panel on path to leadership, so we're going to have one more question for the panel up here, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. And do we have mic runners? Okay, we do have mic runners available for questions. So the last question for the panel here is, what advice do you have for individuals who want to achieve a leadership position in tech? So what advice would you give to the aspiring individuals in this room who want to be an inclusive leader in tech?
Well, first, don't think because you don't have a quote-unquote traditional path that you can't do it. I think a lot of people psych themselves out from the word go because they didn't know from they were 9 years old that they wanted to be, an engineer, or they wanted to be a front-end, web developer. I think something, we need to, sort of get rid of that myth of, you have to go to, Stanford or Caltech or MIT, and that's the only way to work in the tech industry. And then I think from there, it's just, perseverance, really, because it is going to be hard to break through, especially if you're in Silicon Valley, which is maybe why I'm in New York. But breaking through that there's really no way to do it other than try to be as personable and charming as you can, because you don't have the luxury to be some weird Aspergery, engineer. Like, you can't be Black and Mark Zuckerberg and succeed, where you're not looking people in the eye and you're not charming and you're not really dynamic. You can't be one of these sort of antisocial tech types if you're going to break through. I think, Kinjil made a great point earlier. Like, you have to step up and say, you know what, I'm going to fake like the stuff that you guys like so that I can get into the conversation with you. I'm going to wear those like really ugly, like orange red pants and like talk about the Hamptons and like play golf. Like you're gonna have to get involved in that discussion, because then you won't get invited out to the whiskey where all the actual business and opportunity is happening.
Yeah.
And I think that's again part of the theater of being a diverse candidate or diverse, tech worker, is that it is stagecraft. And I think, acknowledging that stagecraft at a certain level so that you can get to the point and finally say, haha, I tricked you, I don't like to wear that shit, I'm gonna, wear my snapback, Yankees cap and a pair of dunks and say, fuck off. Yeah. But you have to get to that point where you have the power to do that. Otherwise, you're gonna hit roadblocks. I mean, there are times where I've walked into rooms and I could tell right away it was, haircut or the way I was dressed, or an idiom or colloquial piece of slang that I threw out in a meeting just sort of slipped out because I got too relaxed. And then people were making comments. I think I used the term swagger jack like 9 months ago, and one of my bosses still brings it up like, oh, you taught me a new term. So these are the sorts of differences that get identified, and then I start worrying, like, did that hurt my professional aura? Am I deemed now less worthy of, promotion? Am I sort of this anomaly that people, bring to meetings so that I can represent my entire race when someone needs to know something about, Black audiences or Black something? Everyone sort of turns and looks at me and like I'm the, the spokesperson for, that entire community. Yeah. And I think that's just, it is what it is. And like I wouldn't want to sugarcoat to someone to say that you don't have to play a little bit of that game.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to mention. You know, some folks call it politic interplay in the game, and one of my mentors mentioned it's like using the wind in the sail. Sometimes you have to use it to get you where you want to go, and then that level of self-awareness as well is important. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the fake it till you make it is a really big part of it, and that usually means blending in to some extent. I think I described the problem a little bit as we have a standard deviation problem. So basically, we have a very big in-group, and if you deviate too much from that, then you stand out too much, and that could be anything. But then once you do make it, I think it is sort of a responsibility of ours to then sort of push the edge of the standard deviation out just a little tick. So earlier in my career as an engineer, I did try to fit in by wearing the logo t-shirts and the jeans and everything. And now I'm very intentional about dressing more feminine because I want to just push that out a tiny bit and say, like, yes, there is room for a feminine woman leading in engineering.
I think companies that create environments where people can be their true selves are going to have a competitive advantage. And I'm very proud to work at Pandora in Oakland, and we have an environment, perhaps because it started off with artists, musicians, that is fairly soulful. And when you have an environment that is accepting of people from different backgrounds and perspectives, and by the way, we're by no means where we'd like to be. But I think that, if people can be themselves, they can bring forth into their environments, their true selves, it creates a place that's, people are happier. So I think the advice that I would have for people that, that want to be leaders of successful companies is you've got to be curious about people, where they come from, what their perspective is, and seek to create an environment that's inclusive.
Okay, good information.
I will say, in my experience, yes, you should remember your differences, and yeah, you should fake it till you make it. But ultimately, you have to be able to impact the business, and results speak for themselves. It doesn't matter what race you are, what gender you are. If you're delivering, like, nobody can look past that. And about the perseverance, like, it's fucking hard work. Work hard. Like, I came over-prepared to every meeting. I tried to stay 2 steps ahead. I figured out opportunities when I was really young in my career of how to impact the business, and sought kind of like carve that out and would present that back to management and say, like, here's a project I think I should work out. I stretched, I put in the hours. Like, nobody can fuck with ration, right? Like, if you're like a rational person that's speaking about the business, and you're showing results, and you're talking about a test design, your shit, like, it doesn't matter who you are, people see past that and they get excited about what you can deliver to the company. And so don't let your differences always stay top of mind to the point where it's a handicap. Like, ultimately, it's hard work. Like, pathway to leadership is, making up the differences by really, really showing how you can deliver to the company. And you can't skirt that. So, I would say that that's kind of first and foremost, is figuring out how you can deliver and make an impact on the business.
Great. Own your stuff and get results. I love it. Love it. So we have no questions from the audience. We have like 2 minutes on the clock, and they're going to start the Grammy music now. So we are at a close for the panel now. So I want to thank our panelists, and thanks to Wayne and Melinda for putting this together.